Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it. You know, I came over from the States to be part of the summit. I really appreciate seeing everybody here today. And, you know, I get the chance to travel all around the world, and I get to learn a lot going around the world. I learned something last night when somebody said it's going to be nice and fresh tomorrow. I didn't know what that meant. It sounded actually pleasant and spring-like, and I was looking forward to it. But, you know, now I get the irony of that. So anyway, I appreciate everybody braving the cold this morning and be here with us at our summit. It's fantastic to see folks here. During the course of the day, we're going to have over 600 organizations represented here, over 1,000 folks, which is really great to see, and I think really kind of emphasizes the importance of cybersecurity on a global basis everywhere we go. You know, more and more recognition, more people gathering to talk about this topic. We just held one of these actually yesterday in Shanghai, close to 1,000 people there as well. So, you know, cyber's clearly a very global topic, something that we all have to unite behind. And that's really what I kind of want to talk about this morning, not so much about, you know, Palo Networks or technology, but, you know, what has to happen from a cyber perspective. And our point of doing these kind of get-togethers is really to enable and empower folks. You know, this is an opportunity for us to bring the very best and the brightest in cybersecurity together. You know, talk about the hardest topics, talk about very candidly what's working, you know, what's not working. Hopefully give people a chance to network with some of the best minds in the industry and then in the theaters, and try to solve some of the hardest problems. At the end of the day, that's what we need to do to really move the ball forward here, to talk about what has to be done and to make it done. And this is really, really important for us. If you have any exposure to Palo Networks in the past, you know a couple things about us. You know, one is that we fundamentally believe that we're living in the digital age. It's pretty much everything in our personal life, in our business life, and governments is increasingly reliant on digital technology. That's great, of course, because with digital technology in the digital age, we get amazing productivity enhancements. That's critical for GDP growth on a global basis, with population explosion and increase in aging and all the things we know about, really increasingly rely on digital technology. But the flip side of digital technology, of course, is its soft underbelly then from a security perspective, because it's underlying everything, right? So when it doesn't go right, it's a real problem. And, you know, the pressing issue with all of digitization that I hear constantly, particularly in corporations, is the idea of digital transformation, right? So if you're sitting in business meetings or organizational meetings in governments, you know, people are constantly talking about digital transformation. And what does that really mean? You know, it really means bringing macro technology trends that happen to be coinciding at the same time that can do wonderful things like SaaS and cloud computing and machine learning and behavior analytics and artificial intelligence and quantum computing and things that we see right in front of us, we're using today. And the combination of those forces is driving amazing digital transformation, which is great, as I said, because we get so much productivity gains from those, and people are using them to try to get the competitive edge in their businesses. So most CEOs that I speak with, boards of directors that I get a chance to talk with around the world, are all very, very focused on saying, how do I harness digital transformation to give me a significant competitive advantage in my business? Because I'm afraid that in the course of a very short period of time, 5 years perhaps, right, or less, that I could be completely left behind, you know, if I'm not on this cloud wagon, right, or things along those lines. And those are very serious considerations and things that we have to take into account. You know, when we think about it from a security perspective, though, we're pretty sure that you can't have digital transformation if you don't have security transformation at the same time. And what I mean by that is harnessing the same macro technology trends in order to provide the security to secure all the digital transformation, because in the absence of that, it's very questionable. It's maybe existentially questionable about whether we're actually going to have a digital transformation. And the underlying portion of that, of course, is trust, right? Which is when we actually are thinking about the digital age and productivity and digital transformation, you know, ultimately where we see the cracks in the system, or even sometimes things falling apart, is when we lose trust. And we don't have to look very far for that. You see lots of breaches happening. We see trust questions in election systems. We see it in social media. We see it in privacy and data. Not all those are security related, by the way, right? But a lot of ways to lose trust very quickly. is to have security issues, particularly when it comes to privacy and data and things along those lines. So these things are really related, which is the digital transformation relies on trust, trust relies on good security relies on security transformation, in our opinion, around this as well. So, we're living in very interesting times, and without trust, we don't think things are going to move forward. So that's the first thing. It's one of our viewpoints as a company at Palo Networks. The second, if you spend any time with us, is in the face of all that potential anxiety, we're optimists. All right, we think it all turns out okay on a long-term basis. It's going to turn out okay. And we may say, well, how can you be an optimist, right, when you have all these problems that feel like they're gathering steam around us? And perhaps, hopefully not naively, the reason we're optimistic about this is because we have to be. The consequences are too severe if we don't get this right? So our view is failure's not an option, right? It's literally not an option for our society as we know it. So we better work together, we better sort it out, and we better get it right. And what would right look like? And a view of that would be, this is a risk, right? Cyber is a risk, has great gains, but it has a lot of risk. And like many situations like that, it has to be contained. I mean, it's not going away. The chance that cybersecurity risk and downside that we are living with and dealing with is going to be solved completely, I would put it 0. The chance that it would be contained so that it becomes an acceptable risk in our personal lives and our business lives within our working lifetimes, I would say is pretty high, right? As long as we do a certain number of things. But that's kind of what success would look like, is containment of the risk, just like we've contained other things that have a lot of value, nuclear energy, but it also has downside, right? We've figured out how to contain those risks, so we're not having conferences about those things every day like we do about cybersecurity, right? So that's kind of my definition of success, is we're not talking about it every day. It just is in the background, it's there, and we've contained those risks, or get it compartmentalized. And kind of how would you do that, right? Our view on this is starting with what's the nature of the problem in the first place? Because if you don't understand the problem, it's unlikely you're going to understand the solution. And the nature of the problem in cybersecurity is it's a math battle. What I mean by that is the cost of compute power has been going down quickly for a very long time, and the cost of compute power is going to keep going down quickly for a very long time. That's very unlikely to change, right? When the cost of compute power goes down like that, the benefits of that substantially go to the adversary in cybersecurity, because they are not encumbered as we are with large organizations, changing employee sets, mergers and acquisitions, and all the things that complicate our ability to defend against cyber attacks. They get to go very fast. They're using the same innovations that I talked about before. They're using them cleaner, faster, quicker than we get to use them. And that's a problem, right? That's a math battle problem. So in math, using this concept about how do you fix that, there's the idea of leverage, a mathematical concept of leverage, which is we have to get a lot more leverage than we're getting today, because the adversary is getting leverage much, much faster than we are. And that's how we have to work together in order to compartmentalize those risks. Or to state it a different way, right? The adversary that we're fighting today is increasingly automated. Right? We see increasing levels of sophistication of attacks, more attacks, and they're launching these attacks for less and less cost on their side. So it's also an economic battle. The economics are not in our favor, right? So we have to fundamentally get leverage to change the economics to make successful attacks more and more expensive, not only economically, but also on a personal basis, freeze bank accounts, put people in jail, all the things that we're not yet doing, right? So we have to figure those things out because the adversary is increasingly automated. I had recently had the opportunity to speak with a well-known ethical hacker who spends a lot of time in the underworld, if you will, of cybersecurity. And she was telling me and others that her prediction, which I take seriously, is that in 5 years from today, from an attack perspective, there will be almost completely machine-based attacks, meaning there will be very few humans behind the attacks. So if you let that sink in for a second, right, the level of sophistication of attacks in the next 5 years is going to dwarf everything we've seen in the prior 10. Right, so if you have machines that are launching attacks and AI-based attacks, and humans are increasingly removed from that system, they get smarter, they get faster, they get more sophisticated, The problem set that we're looking at today is going to look fundamentally different in just a few years' time. And what are we going to do about that, right? So how do we get leverage in the system when the attackers themselves become increasingly automated, right? So how do we stop bringing people to a software fight? We have to bring software to a software fight, right? And not continually rely to people on that. We need to put people in the jobs that people, human beings, can do best, but we better figure out how to automate ourselves very, very quickly because the adversary is increasingly automated. So that's kind of the setup as to like what's going to happen, where's the world going. We don't have a lot of time to figure it out before things get really different than they are today. So with that in mind, our approach as a company, and we're just one company, right? We're the largest security company in the world now, but we're just one company, has been how do we get increasing leverage into the system? You heard Rob a little earlier this morning say, our mission as a company from the day we opened the doors about 12 years ago has been this, which is how do we protect our digital way of life, right, by preventing successful cyber attacks. Now that's a very ambitious statement. It's meant to be very ambitious because the stakes are very, very high. So we try to be ambitious with this, and we try to do a lot behind this statement that actually has not a lot to do with the company itself, but more what society has to do. By having a broad mission statement, we get to do a lot of things underneath this. You know, when I go to the board of directors and say, I'm going to spend some money on this, and they say, what does that have to do with the top line? Like, absolutely nothing, but it's a part of the mission, you know. So it helps us get a lot of leverage into the system. And that's really what I want to talk to you about a little this morning is, what does that look like? You know, what are the things that we're working on alone together on a global basis that may not be as obvious, where we get to engage with folks like yourself, governments like we're doing here, education systems, and really to solicit your help and more support, and how do we work together to get increasing leverage, right? And this idea of this leverage in a math battle is absolutely critical. So I want to go through a few ways where we say, hey, if we can put $1 of resource, a person, $1, a piece of technology, against part of the problem here, how can we get 10 times, you know, the return on that if we're all working together? So the first point in this is, like I said, the mission statement of protecting our way of life in the digital age. But when we think about how do we get leverage, we really kind of put it in 4 categories: a political, a cultural, something I would call foundational, and then obviously a technology level as well. Trying to get near-term gain. We're also trying to take a long time horizon view on this because, like I said, cyber risk is not going away today, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, right? This is an effort to compartmentalize this risk over time. So I'll go through these kind of quickly, but I'm going to hit 4 of these specifically because they may be of interest. And the first is in what I would call the policy realm. Okay, this is leadership, political leadership, which is, and I'm going to only speak from a U.S. perspective because that's what I know best, but I would argue that we really don't have any definition of success when it comes for cybersecurity on a long-term basis. Lots of people are working very diligently, very hard every day of the week to make things better, but it feels very like an incrementalist approach, meaning there's no organizing principle as to what success would look like. So in order to help try to solve some of that, something I've been very privileged to work on personally outside of Palo Alto Networks is I have sat for almost a decade now as an advisor or as a group called the National Security Advisory Council to the President of the United States over multiple administrations, a group of about 30 CEOs that spent time advising directly the President and senior officials in the United States government on issues dealing with cyber as it relates to national security and emergency preparedness. Lots of things have come out of that body over the course of its existence. President Reagan started it a long time ago that have become very useful. Things that I've personally been involved with are security and cloud computing. How would we mobilize assets between public and private sectors in the event of cyber war? But the one we're working on right now is this one, which is called the Cybersecurity Moonshot. And we're hearkening back into the 60s when, again, this is a US-focused statement, but I want to make it international in a second. Back in the 60s, when we faced something that was potentially existential, right? Which was, we had a threat, it was space, the new domain, we're behind, it felt bad, Didn't feel like we were going to catch up. What would we do, right? And President Kennedy laid out the moonshot concept, and he said by the end of the decade, in essence, 10 years' time, put a man on the moon and bring it back safely. At the time he said that, that was thought to be impossible, technically impossible and definitely impossible in 10 years. But the point of it was it allowed government to do what government can do best, which is to be a rallying cry and a catalyst for something very ambitious that provided leadership and focus on a long-term basis. So all the actual work that was happening every day of the week was now set against a goal. And we would argue this has to happen in cybersecurity because it is existential. It's existential to our digital way of life. So we need to start acting like that. All right, so this idea of the cybersecurity moonshot is to lay out a very ambitious goal. This is it. Make the internet safe in 10 years. As soon as I say that to people, they say, what does safe mean? That's impossible. Unlike the moon, how would you measure it, right? I have heard all of the objections, right? Which is fine. That's actually the point. The point is to have the discourse and dialogue to say, we need an ambitious goal here. We need an organizing principle in cybersecurity with some definition of success that not only the technologist, but the average person on the street can understand. And then we need to rally our resources and focus in a way that is very ambitious because we better sort it out. We better get more serious than we are today, and we better stop incrementing on this, right? This is very real in the United States now. This has been adopted by the NSTAC, this body. It is also being sponsored by the Vice President of the United States personally. You're going to hear a lot about the cybersecurity moonshot, is my guess, coming out of the US. And now we need to internationalize that, right? Because unlike the original moonshot, no one nation can figure this out on themselves. The internet's a very global asset, and we better work together, right? So, I spent the better part of yesterday in Canberra. I had the opportunity to spend time one-on-one with the Prime Minister on this topic and many other ministers to solicit support from Australia on this, right? We need to get the friendly governments of the world in unison and working on these topics of something as ambitious as this. We can't do it alone for sure, and if we try, we'll screw it up, right? So we need everybody working together on this. I would love to have help from Australia and other nations as well. So I'm making the rounds, right? I had a great day yesterday on talking about this and got a lot of positive feedback as well. If you're personally interested in this, if this excites you in any kind of way, I would love to hear from you afterwards. There's a lot going on underneath this. Now, just last point on this, that's a big idea, right? So what we don't want to do is boil the ocean. We have a lot of rooftop shots before we get to the moon. So we've organized this into tracks, 5 tracks underneath it. Those tracks look like education, diplomacy, technology, right? And so, for example, in the education track, if it was your job to make the internet safe in 10 years, and we're talking about the education system, what would you do? My guess, again, U.S. statement, we'd be a lot more serious about STEM education. We'd be making sure that we were developing right now, in 10 years, a crop of fantastic, sophisticated data scientists, artificial intelligence developers. That's what we would be doing. We're not. All right? If we were serious about making the internet safe, what would we do around quantum computing from a focus and resource perspective? What would we do? I talked a lot about this yesterday, and a lot of folks in your government. What would we actually do about supply chain integrity? Would we be willing to have the national will to subsidize industries and bring them back on shore in order to have supply chain integrity, for example? So the point of this topic is step away from the paper. Let's take a long-term view, define something ambitious success, so that whatever we're doing tomorrow is actually working towards a goal where we're not playing checkers, we're playing chess, right? So very interesting topic. Like I said, if there's interest in this, I'd love to hear from you. But that's one area, I'll call that the political will, the political leadership that Palo Alto Networks has been very involved with and happy to put resources and time into that. The second area, very quickly, I'll talk about is cultural. And this is the area of what I call cooperation, right? We need a culture of cooperation and optimism when it comes to cybersecurity, because, like I said, the consequences of failure are too high. So we need to assume success here, and then we need to work together to drive that kind of success. And another thing that we've been very privileged to be involved with over the last 5 years, we started it 5 years ago. It's now become an important thing. It's its own thing. It's not about our company. Is one example of here is the Cyber Threat Alliance. And the Cyber Threat Alliance is the largest security companies in the world now have come together to openly share their threat intelligence, right? So this has been bugging me for a long time, for a decade or so, that when you think about cyber security threat intelligence, indicators of compromise, public-private partnerships, sharing, all the things that are really important. Pretty much every industry in the world has already decided a long time ago that they will compete, inside that industry, companies will compete with each other, but when it comes to cybersecurity, they're going to help each other. So they formed ISACs, right, FS-ISAC and Healthcare ISAC, and all these information sharing organizations, generally manual in nature, but nonetheless, philosophically, they said, we need to help each other. Perversely, the only industry in the world that didn't do that was the security industry. Right? The security industry likes to come to you one at a time and say, my threat intelligence is very special and good, and you should buy my stuff to get it, but I'm not going to give it to my competitor in the security industry. So then you end up buying his stuff too, right? And try to piece this puzzle together. We think that's an archaic idea. We actually think that's counter to public policy. So the idea of the Cyber Threat Alliance was to go around to the security industry, I know all the CEOs personally, and say, hey, we need to stop competing with each other on what we know, and we better start competing with each other on what you can do with what you know. So taking the threat intelligence and propagating into products and platforms, that's the future, because it's surprising to me that customers allow us to continue to work in our silos, candidly. I think that indicators of compromise and threat intelligence should be a public good. And everybody should share these things because it's an existential threat. Back to the big picture, we better start working together. To the credit of the large security companies, they agreed to that, and that created the Cyber Threat Alliance, which is now Palo Networks and Fortinet and Symantec and McAfee and Checkpoint and Cisco and Juniper, and almost all the large security companies who all know very interesting things. So what does this mean? What it means is that we've actually stood up servers, STIX language servers, machine language, back to automation, right? We've stood these servers up, and every day of the week, these companies are sharing their indicators of compromise openly with each other. And then we all take that common knowledge, and we're propagating it into our product and tool sets to try to compete down there, but we're sharing this very, very openly today. So a major step forward. The second thing the Cyber Threat Alliance is doing, which is now a nonprofit organization, it's its own organization, it's self-funded, it has its own staff and CEO, is they're using all that common indicators of compromise and threat intelligence to disrupt adversary playbooks, right? So when the adversary comes up with an attack, today, unfortunately, they develop an attack. It doesn't cost them a lot. They get to use it 500,000 times globally, and it's a great business model for them, right? So the second thing the Cyber Threat Alliance is doing is saying, well, we actually know a lot about those attacks because we aggregated all of our collective wisdom about it, and we told everybody how the attack works. So they're doing that on a more frequent basis, and that's actually very important that works, because if you're publishing the adversary playbooks very, very quickly and everybody knows how it works, the attack doesn't work anymore. You can defend yourself. Right, so the goal of the Cyber Threat Alliance is to be publishing against these playbooks in a highly automated way so that an adversary's attack only works a couple times, not 500,000 times. And when that happens, it dramatically changes their economic model. When the attack only works a few times, you've got to come up with a new one. They have finite resources as well, and we're trying to put them out of business, at least the cyber criminals, right? We're going to take out all the players who will not have the resources to develop a new attack every single day, whereas today they can use an attack for months and months and months, right? So important work happening in the Cyber Threat Alliance. I have a plea I always make for folks as well, which is if you're a technology buyer, security technology buyer, the next security company that comes to call on you asking you to buy their stuff, ask them if they're a member of the Cyber Threat Alliance. If they're not, ask them why not. They cannot give you a good answer that is not selfish, right? We're going to force everybody into this model so that we can all share this information very freely, like I said, and move the competitive playing field away from siloed approaches on threat intelligence. Third area, I said there were 4 areas. The third area I want to talk about is, I'll call this foundational or fundamental, right? And this is systemic in nature, which is how do we get a lot of leverage over a long-term basis on developing the skill sets that we need today and we're going to need in 10 years' time, right? There's an enormous host of things behind this that we're doing with universities, education systems, both for people and technology, internships, a whole bunch of stuff. But the one I wanted to comment on here very quickly, because I'm very, very proud of this one, was, and it's got a lot of leverage, right? It was a partnership we struck last year with the Girl Scouts. And the reason we did that, and the reason the Girl Scouts wanted to do that, was we got together and we partnered to create 18 cybersecurity badges for young women. that they can start to learn and earn, starting in kindergarten all the way up through university, right? So the basics of cyber hygiene all the way up to cryptography. Now, why is that important? It's important because we need a lot more talent in cybersecurity than we have today, and we need to develop that at an early age and take a long-term view on this, right? Today in cybersecurity, only 11% of the workforce on a global basis is female, but the population of the world is 50%. So we're massively underutilized from an extraordinarily important resource here, and we need to take a systemic approach to this, right? So this approach is very interesting because in the United States, there's 2.2 million Girl Scouts in the United States. They're in every single city, every single state, every single zip code. They've already created a train-the-trainer program that's has worked for decades. They've already figured out how to reward skill sets. Like if you know how to build a fire, you get the fire badge, right? You know, so now they get cybersecurity badges, 18 of them starting at a very young age. So at a minimum, we hope to teach cyber hygiene to young women more, and hopefully over time to get them more involved in actual cybersecurity and cryptography, and hopefully they'll make this a career choice over time when they get their hands on it and they can work and in some cases play with these things because we gamified it as well. So lots of other stuff here on the education side, but this is the point of this is taking a very systemic approach. We are interested in input around this as well on badge development. I'll talk in a few minutes about what we're doing in Australia around this. If this sounds interesting, we'd love to hear from you too. And the last area that I'll hit on the force side is actually in technology, and this is this is where you see our company the most, right? On the technical side, we've been very privileged, like I said, about 12 years to go from our founder's kitchen to be the largest cybersecurity company in the world. And the reason for that is we've been trying to solve two fundamental problems, the ones I started with. How do you bring more automation to cybersecurity when automation matters? And the second thing is, how do we actually make it a lot easier to consume security innovation than it is today? And what I mean by that is the security industry is actually highly innovative. That's why there's 2,000 security companies any day of the week. The problem is, you got all that innovation, how do you run it? How do you operationalize it, right? When the next thing comes along, the next needed requirement in security comes along, there's another tool, another agent or whatever that is. So how do we solve automation and then making consumption of innovation much simpler? We've been doing this through what I call evolutionary revolutions or revolutionary evolutions. We can reverse them, but basically the idea here is you can have lots of highly innovative technology that might be considered revolutionary in nature, but this is enterprise security, so it's evolutionary. It takes time, right, to do this. So our approach to that has been a platform approach that is really trying to bring a lot of automation and ease of consumption, right? So here's my diagram. I'm not going to bore you with the diagram, but what we've been doing very successfully for over 10 years now is delivering on those two promises. And I want to show you this one because the third evolution is critical, and it's just happening now, right? So the first evolution in security, we would argue, in automation and ease of consumption, happened about 10 years ago when we invented it, which was how do you take network security, where all the data used to be in a network, where you had best-of-breed approaches, many point products, each doing an individual feature or function, all of them very important to try to stop an attack and deliver it in a completely different way, where you don't give up any of the capabilities, but you get to use it in a model that is entirely different. So we did that, right? And what that looks like today is network security capabilities that are almost entirely delivered from the cloud as SaaS applications. So that is automation, because these are software operations running simultaneously in the cloud, and ease of consumption, because we took entire sub-industries in security, IPS, APT sandboxing, IDS, URL filtering, and we turn them into software features, right? So if you're still using those capabilities as individual componentry, particularly hardware in the network, most people aren't, right? Those are SaaS security features today, and those entire industries have been disrupted, as they should be, because they shouldn't all be separate things. The capability is very important, but the delivery model was actually hurting operationally and was too complex, too hard to run, too expensive to figure out. None of it worked together, so we solved that very successfully over the last 10 years. The second evolution was to say, well, data is not just on your network anymore. It's in endpoints and IoT devices, and now it's in the cloud and third-party SaaS applications. So can you have that exact same prevention outcome, have it exactly the same everywhere where your data is, and have no human beings involved? simply because your data moved around and not have a different security posture or outcome simply because your data was in AWS versus your data center versus on a mobile device versus on a laptop, et cetera. So we started about 6 years ago. We solved that problem. Again, the way to do that is using the cloud. And today, getting consistency of security regardless of its data location and breaking down the silos the way that people used to think about, I have network security and I have endpoint security and now I have cloud security. That idea is going to the wayside very, very quickly. I just have to secure my enterprise. I have to secure my data. So we've solved the problem called exactly the same security, everywhere, all the time, no human involvement, and happy to talk about that later on if you're interested. I had to give you that background to get to the third evolution, which is very exciting, which is called the application framework, which substantially solves the consumption model of innovation. Right? So in security, like I said, it's very important that there's a lot of innovation happening because it's a math battle and the adversary is moving very quickly. 1. 2, no single company can do everything. We definitely can't. There's no way in the world where we can invent everything fast enough in security. It has to happen. That's why there's 2,000 security companies, right? That's a second opportunity and challenge, right? The third thing is, like I said, until now, in order to consume all that innovation from the security industry, almost every one of those companies, if they came to you with a great idea, network behavior analytics or user behavior anomaly detection or whatever the great idea of the moment is, and they're all important, and you wanted that thing, they would tell you, all you have to do is install my hardware, my software agent, my virtual, whatever it is, install this data collection thing everywhere, operationalize it, run it, train your staff on it. None of them work together. Get the 97th tool and install it and run it because they have to collect data to deliver answers from a security perspective. So we moved the ball very forward on this with the concept of the application framework. Now being the largest security company in the world, we said, hey, wait a minute, we're already deployed. We already deployed the hardware. We already deployed the endpoints. We already deployed the cloud security capabilities. And we have many, 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 many petabytes of data in a giant data lake. Why don't we change the game? Which we did. So we opened that up to third-party security companies, including our competition, and we said, if you have a great idea in security, and it's an algorithm, which most things are, instead of taking the algorithm and putting them into yet one more tool that needs to be deployed to collect data, don't do that. We already collected the data. Just take the algorithm and write it as a software application on top of this application framework, which they're doing now. So think of it as an app store for enterprise security where you get to use third-party innovation very quickly by turning it on. You've already, in most cases, people have already deployed the form factors that they need to collect data and enforce the answers if they use the Palo Networks infrastructure. And we've proven this to be possible now where you can go into the app store, find whatever the next innovation is, and turn it on as a SaaS application, and it's enabled in everything you already deployed without deploying anything new. Okay, so very exciting times around this. We think if I go back to automation and needs of consumption and making sure we're using machines against the adversary, we think this is the future of security. I'm actually positive that in 5 years' time, going back to that 5-year time frame, that most innovation in security will be consumed this way. Last month, we had our annual user conference in California. We had over 5,000 of our customers there, of our 50+ thousand customers we have today, and over 30 companies, third-party companies, Microsoft, Splunk, ServiceNow, Proofpoint, and a lot of small security companies, they demoed their applications on top of this application framework. This is production ready in August, meaning you'll be able to consume third-party applications over top of this. There are 50 more companies writing applications right now. And I would expect we get this right. If we come back here in the next couple years' time, there'll be hundreds of applications in the content store for enterprise security, and it will massively change the entire consumption model in security and drive a lot more innovation. So we're very happy about this. We're excited about it. You'll hear more about it, and I'd love to spend time with you on it as well. So that's the fourth area I went through, which is the political will, the cultural optimism. What do we need to do foundationally from an educational perspective and what we're doing technically? And again, in each one of these cases, we're trying to put a lot of leverage every dollar we spend to get more and more out of that. If I bring it a little closer to home, and a couple things I wanted to mention before getting off stage here in Australia, very important market for us. The Asia Pacific region, Australia particularly, is the fastest growing market in the world for Palo Alto Networks. There are various reasons for that, but we're trying to do things here in this theater as well. that we've done on a global basis, starting with some of the things I mentioned with the Girl Scouts and extending that to the Girl Guides here in Australia. We'd love to have the same kind of partnership there. We already started working with the Girl Guides here. If you have interest in this as well, we'd like to hear from you about how do we get together and make things better and faster on these foundational elements. Second thing, we just opened our cyber range on Tuesday. The days are running together for me, but I was in Sydney on Tuesday. Cut the ribbon on this. What is the cyber range? It is a way for your teams to put hands on the technology in a very gamified fashion. Red team, blue team each other in an emulated environment like your environment, right? This has been very, very successful tool for people to work on and learn technology. We have this in our headquarters in Santa Clara and Reston, Virginia. I opened up our one in Singapore not too long ago, and now we have it in Sydney as well. So we had our first group of users through there on Tuesday, customers. Very, very good feedback. Love to tell you more about it, show it to you, bring your teams there, and if you can't come to Sydney to do it, we'll bring it to you. So we'll come to Perth, we'll come to Melbourne, we'll go where it needs to go, but some really great technology. And the last point I'll just mention was, I failed to mention a little earlier, we're also doing things on the education side with at very large scale in the United States with veterans. I'm a former military officer myself, and we're trying to tap into that community as well to retrain them as they're coming out of the service for cybersecurity skill sets, because we all know that we need a lot more folks in cybersecurity. Very happy to say here in Australia in August we'll be running our very first class here with veterans in Australia as well. So if you're interested in that or know people who are, we'd love to hear from you there. We need to get that into hundreds and hundreds and hundreds at a time. So lots of stuff. I hope that was helpful. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you today. We're super appreciative of your time. Really appreciative of the partnership that we have with many of you, and really trying to drive this leverage point. I hope you really enjoy the rest of the summit. We've got a lot of good sessions for you later in the day. Most importantly, though, I started with our mission, which was to protect our way of life in the digital age. Our mission is meaningless if we're not supporting your mission. We're way more interested in what your missions are. We want to understand those. We want to work with you on that, and that's the point of summits like this, is to get people together, feedback. Please let us know how we did here, but when it's over. We're not perfect. We want to make it better every single time, and I guarantee you we'll take that feedback very seriously. And if there's anything that I said that's interesting where you'd like to engage with us, we would be privileged to engage with you on that. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you later.